What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. So here we are again. Another fall, another so-called budget miracle from Moscow. Except this time it's not even a miracle, it's a full-blown economic self-destruction note wrapped in patriotic slogans. The Kremlin recently dropped the 2026 draft budget, as we all know, and while the official channels are busy parroting words like stability and growth, anyone who can count to 10 knows what this really is. A just desperate attempt to squeeze the last remaining rubles out of already broken population. Honestly, it cannot even be called squeezing out anymore. It's just pure robbery of population to pay for their own fathers, sons and husbands' deaths. The headlines talk about defense spending, strategic resilience and fiscal discipline, but between the lines it says only one thing. We guys ran out of money again. And 2026, by the way, is just yet to begin. And no money already. You don't need to be an economist to see the pattern. Every year since the invasion began, the government has sworn that this next fiscal plan will finally stabilize the economy. Yet, every time the promises fade, the deficits grow, and the war machine keeps devouring everything that still moves. What we are witnessing right now is not just bad management. It is the anatomy of a collapsing state that is trying so hard to keep a war going with borrowed time, borrowed money, and borrowed lives. Let's start with the heart of the madness, the 2% VAT increase. Sounds boring and not substantial, well, it's not. It's robbery disguised as policy. The government calls it a necessary adjustment to ensure defense and security needs, almost literal quote. Translation: ordinary Russians will now pay for the war with every grocery purchase, every haircut, every loaf of bread. The value-added tax once at 20% will now climb to 22%. That might sound like nothing, but in a country where millions live paycheck to paycheck, this change is the difference between survival and collapse. Just think about it this way. You earn 30,000 rubles a month, around $350. You spend all of it because you have no choice: rent, food, school supplies, gas, maybe one beer on payday if you're lucky, if you have 50 rubles left. That means every ruble you spend is taxed. Congratulations, you are now giving 22% of your income to the same government that thanks you by sending your neighbor's son to die in Donetsk. Meanwhile, somebody in Moscow earning 300,000 rubles bi-weekly, who spends only a third of it, will barely feel a thing. This is what economists call a regressive tax. What we call it here is a poverty penalty. The poorer you are, the higher your effective tax rate is. The Kremlin just pretty much monetized misery. And let's not forget the cherry on top. They are slashing the VAT exemption threshold. Before, small businesses earning less than 60 million rubles a year did not have to pay VAT. Now, this 60 million became only 10 million, that's it. A revenue level so low that even a food truck or a half-decent coffee stand in St. Petersburg will get hit. For perspective, 10 million rubles a year is the turnover of a busy shawarma kiosk. Well, as you can see, the message is clear here, no one escapes. Whether you're a barber, a baker or a plumber, you are now part of this great war funding machine. And of course the propaganda spins it as equal contribution. They say everyone must share the burden. But let's be honest, not everyone is sharing equally. The oligarchs with their offshore accounts will not notice a thing. The bureaucrats with access to state funds will quietly just compensate themselves with bonuses. The only people actually paying are the ones who cannot afford to hide their spending. Pretty much the everyday Russian consumer. Every chocolate bar, every bus ticket, every pair of shoes becomes a little more expensive, multiplied by dozens of millions similar transactions daily. And suddenly this 2% increase is significant. Inflation will rise, and Moscow will pretend to be surprised again. But that's not the only smart way the Kremlin realized they can continue funding Putin's war. Let's talk about some other methods in our next chapter. Now let's move to the next act of this absurd spectacle, the government's frantic scavenger hunt for cash. The Ministry of Finance has turned into a pack of starving wolves, sniffing out any corner of the economy that still shows signs of life. The latest targets: imported cars, self-employed workers, and anything that even remotely smells like prosperity. Take imported vehicles, for example. Until recently, you could bring in a modest used car from Korea or Japan for personal use, pay a manageable utilization fee, and just, that's it, be done with it, drive it every day, don't even worry about it. Well, not anymore. Starting in 2026, Russia will apply commercial-grade fee, hundreds of thousands of rubles to any car over 160 horsepower. Even if you're not reselling it, if you just own it. They're literally taxing horsepower now. That is how desperate things have become. It's not about luxury SUVs anymore. This hits anyone who just wants a reliable mid-range car that is not made out of Soviet-era plastic and metal. Then there's a self-employment tax. Remember when Putin's government bragged about helping small entrepreneurs with extremely low affordable 4 to 6 rates? Well, that was banned when they had budget surpluses and wanted to bring the grey economy back into the light. Well, those days are gone now. Now the same people who once praised freelancers and handymen as heroes of modern Russia are quietly preparing to raise their taxes to 13%, more than twice. The same as pretty much at this point the standard income rate. Because apparently the only thing worse than being poor in today's Putin's Russia is being self-employed now. What's next then? Will they tax oxygen? And if they could meter despair, they would put that on the books too. The logic here is painfully simple. The war costs trillions and the economy is not growing. So instead of creating value, the state is just shifting the weight onto whoever is still standing. The Kremlin's accountants are not managing the economy anymore. They're managing a slow-motion collapse. What is ironic here is how familiar all this feels. Back in the Soviet era, when the state could not make enough money from production, it simply raised taxes and blamed the people for, guess what? Not working hard enough. Today's Russia is just doing the same thing in just high definition, in modern everything. The faces have changed, the speeches sound fancier, but well, the math has not. Math's still the same. Numbers do not lie. When you're taxing everyone for breathing while waging an endless war, you are not running a government. You're running just an extortion racket. How long can this last? Well, history shows not very long, until people start seriously complaining. Will be different this time though. Let's talk about in our next chapter. Now here is where it gets truly insane. The Kremlin actually believes this will work. They think that by raising taxes only and introducing new fees, they can just plug a deficit that already exceeds 4 trillion rubles. For perspective, that is more than the entire education and healthcare budgets combined. Even if the VAT increase brings in an extra trillion, which it won't, it still will not scratch the surface. The math simply does not add up. It never will. Here's why. You cannot tax what does not exist. You cannot increase revenue in a stagnant economy. Russia's growth is either flatlining or shrinking. Businesses are closing, investments are vanishing, and skilled workers are fleeing in record numbers. Every ruble the government pulls out of the economy through new taxes kills a little more productivity. Every small business that shuts down means fewer future taxpayers. This is what economists call a vicious cycle. Even the central bank knows that the situation is dire. Interest rates are already sky high, more than 20% for interest rates, imagine this. So credit is obviously drying up. Construction, manufacturing, retail are suffocating. And yet, the government keeps piling on. They're not stimulating growth, they're strangling it. You cannot milk a cow that's already been butchered. And the most absurd part, they cannot even cut spending, because where could they? Defense spending alone has ballooned to 12.6 trillion rubles, an astronomical figure that eats up nearly half of the entire budget. And well, they cannot touch it obviously, because the whole thing is for the war. Because doing so would mean admitting that the war is a black hole swallowing the country whole. Everything else from housing subsidies to pensions depends on the government money. If you cut those, entire industries collapse overnight. If they keep them, the deficit explodes. It's lose-lose scenario. Heads they lose, tails they lose, well, just flip a coin, Mr. Putin. This is the economy of a war economy. It runs beautifully on paper as long as the bombs are falling, factories are humming, and soldiers are dying. But the moment the shooting stops, it implodes. The military sector cannot turn missiles into washing machines or drones into dinner plates. When peace eventually comes, and it will, there will be no industries left to rebuild from. Just warehouses full of rusting equipment and graveyards full of men who could have worked those machines. And this brings us to the final brutal truth. Russia is now funding its own destruction. The entire economic system has been re-engineered to serve one goal: prolong the war. Every tax hike, every loan, every desperate measure is another injection into a dying patient to keep the heart pumping a little longer. But make no mistake, the patient is terminal. War does not create value, it destroys it. Every soldier killed, every drone built, every tank manufactured, it all represents resources that could have gone into schools, hospitals and homes. Instead, it is going just into craters somewhere in the middle of the field of Ukraine. Russia is burning its own future to keep up the illusion of power, and what is worth, even a victory, whatever that means anymore, will not fix it. Conquering a ruined Ukrainian town will not refill a treasury. Those villages do not have gold mines or oil fields. They have broken roads, empty homes, and families that will never forgive. Each one is another mouth the Kremlin will have to feed, another pension to pay, another city to rebuild. This is not conquest, it's a burden. And yet, the system cannot stop, because to stop means to admit failure. The bureaucrats know this, the technocrats know this, even the finance ministry knows this. But none of them can say it out loud. They are trapped in their own loop. They must keep finding money to pay for the very war that makes the money disappear. It is self-cannibalizing on a national scale. Soon they will most likely start issuing more federal bonds, forcing state-owned banks to buy them, calling it a strategic investment. But, well, that's not an investment, that's a Ponzi scheme with flags and an anthem. They are borrowing from the future to fund a war that ensures there will not be one. And deep down, every official knows it. The only reason they keep going is fear. Fear of being the first one who stops clapping. Fear of ending up in prison or worse for telling the truth. Well, there you have it, guys. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. If you wish to support our work, there is Patreon, for example, where you can see an additional chapter at the end of this episode. The link is down below. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.